You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
This is Ghost Talk with 187 PI. Sit back and prepare yourselves for an adventure into the paranormal world with host Shelly Robertson and 187 PI research team. Ghost Talk is broadcasting live from Ohio's most haunted jail. Listen as they delve into the history of the old and haunted Paulding County Jail, where some of the residents still live within its walls. Learn about their ongoing research at the jail and abroad, investigation techniques, and their personal encounters. Here is your host of Ghost Talk and 187 PI founder, Shelly Robertson.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ghost Talk Radio. We have a fantastic and, oh my goodness, such an interesting show planned for you tonight. And we are coming to you live from the haunted old Paulding County Jail in Paulding, Ohio. And we invite you all to log into our interactive chat at WBHM-DB.com, and you can ask us any questions you might have. Tonight, Kristen Boyd is here with me, and we will be discussing a super interesting topic. Actually, it's probably our favorite, and it's about serial killers and the hauntings that surround them. We also have a photo album at our Ghost Talk Radio Facebook page with some of the photos of those in tonight's show. Hello and welcome, Kristen.
Hey, everyone.
Isn't this probably your favorite topic, too?
So far, my absolute favorite.
Well, first of all, let's just run down what constitutes a serial killer. A serial killer is typically a person who murders 3 or more people. And they're usually abnormal psychologically. And the murders usually take place over periods more than a month, including a significant period of time between the murders. Now, different authorities apply different criteria when designated serial killers. While most set a threshold of 3 murders or more, minimum 3, others extend it to 4 or lessen it to 2. Now, the FBI, for example, defines a serial killer as someone who kills a series of 2 or more people committed as separate events, usually but not always by the offender acting alone. Now, these murders are often violent and gruesome, causing it to be horrific and making it such a tragic event for the victim, and that is actually the perfect recipe for the spirits of the victims to linger, causing a haunting. Which brings us to our first serial killer, and that's Herb Baumeister. The name itself may not ring a bell, but he most definitely falls into a category as a sadistic serial killer and was located not too far from where we are now. Fox Hollows Farm in Indiana is where Herb burned and buried the remains of at least 11 men, with it being suspected that there were actually many, many more. Now, his odd behavior actually began long before all this happened. Herb, as a child, displayed many different abnormal behaviors. They ranged from playing with dead animals to torturing live ones. And that is usually, folks, the precursor to serial killers in most of the instances. Now, by the time he reached his teens, he had been admitted by his parents for a psychiatric evaluation and was diagnosed with having schizophrenia. However, his parents did little in the attempt to treat his illness. Later in life, in 1970, he was again admitted into a ward, but released just 2 short months later. He was actually able to build a somewhat normal life after that. He got married in 1971. He had 3 children. He was also the founder of the Save-A-Lot grocery store chain in Indianapolis, Indiana, and that happened in 1988. That allowed him and his family to move out to an 18-acre estate called Fox Hollow Farms, which is where his family really began to notice something was not quite right with him. Now, beginning in the 1990s, there was a time frame of mysterious vanishings of gay men within the Indianapolis area, all of which, and by the way, I live in Indianapolis, all of which were the same height, weight, and general appearance. All these men followed the same patterns, and that led authorities to believe that a serial killer was on the loose. Eventually, evidence pointed to Herb, and in 1996, Herb's wife allowed the police to investigate the estate. Herb himself had fled to Canada at this point to commit suicide before he was caught by authorities. Their son told the authorities that they had found a skull on the property, but Herb had dismissed him, explaining that it was part of his grandfather's medical model collection. But when authorities went to where the son had seen the skull, the area had been scorched. Upon further investigation, they ended up digging up more human remains along with a rusty pair of handcuffs. In total, get this folks, in total, 5,500 bones and bone fragments were collected from that area alone. But there was more located in a compost site on their property as well. The family left the property and it eventually sold to Rob and Vicki Graves in 2009, with them fully knowing of the gruesome history behind it. It was not long before it became apparent that something strange was lurking within and around the home. First, incredibly realistic nightmares in which something was chasing them began. They would have electrical appliances often unplug themselves when no one is around, or they would malfunction and turn off and on their own. Sometimes they would even continue running even after they were unplugged. Then there were unexplained knocks on the walls, floors, and doors at night, including one night with a knock on the bedroom door so forceful that the door rattled in its frame. Other frightening incidences began occurring as well. People living on the estate found themselves being poked, pushed, and prodded by something unseen. Pots and pans and furniture would move on their own, and there were frequent occurrences of hearing disembodied voices come from what seemed like nowhere. There has also been an apparition of a man in a red t-shirt that had no legs seen wandering the property.
Wow.
I know, right? It was soon discovered in that area that this figure kept being seen at. His human remains were buried in the dirt where they would see this. As soon as the bone fragments were removed, the man in the red t-shirt was never seen again. So his spirit finally laid to rest, I guess, after they found him. People claim that Herb is still around as well, more than likely being the spirit that causes so much of the chaos that takes place within the estate. EVPs have been recorded with several different voices being apparent, one which may even be Herb himself. Which brings us to who next? One of my favorites, Kristen?
One of the favorites and probably one of the most popular
Yes.
would be Ted Bundy. Now, he is known for being a serial murderer, rapist, and a necrophiliac.
Which is nasty.
Very nasty. and was guessed to have killed 100 people and possibly more.
Oh, yes.
So Bundy actually showed signs of interest in very disturbing things at an early age. Roughly around the age of 3, he became fascinated with knives. Then, by his teenage years, an even darker side began to emerge. He enjoyed peeking into other people's windows to watch them, and
Ew.
also thought nothing of stealing things that he wanted.
A peeping Tom.
Peeping Tom. Well, besides that, Bundy was a very intelligent person, even going to law school and excelling at his work. It is suspected that his actual killings didn't begin until around 1974, when he went off to college.
It was too much for him.
It was then that many women in Seattle and nearby Oregon began coming up missing. Now, in the fall of 1974, Bundy moved to Utah, and once again, women began disappearing around him. It was the following year, when he was pulled over by the cops, that he was placed under arrest for the first time after searching through his car.
Oh, boy.
Now, their search revealed many items for burglary and more. A crowbar, face mask, rope, and handcuffs were some of the items confiscated. Now, it was after this arrest when police began suspecting and linking him together with the disappearances. However, it wasn't until July of 1979 that he was officially caught due to finding and perfectly matching his bite marks on a woman's body that had been murdered.
I think he is the first one they matched bite marks, yes.
Well, it was then that he was convicted of those crimes and others that were linked to him. And he was sentenced to 3 death penalties and was finally executed in Florida by the electric chair in 1989. Now, it's said that Bundy's ghost still shows up within that very prison. It was a decade after he was executed that a guard at the prison told a reporter that him and several other guards claimed to have seen his ghost casually sitting on the electric chair, smiling at them.
Creepy.
Just a little bit.
Creepy.
So if anyone attempted to approach him, he'd disappear. And evidently there were so many sightings of him at one point, the warden couldn't find anyone that would enter the execution chambers alone. Now, Bundy also has showed up around his holding cell on death row, as well as stating to a few guards, "Well, I beat all of you, didn't I?"
Well, not really. I mean...
That's true. He's dead now.
Okay, so this next one, folks, I would guess this is why there's such a hysteria and fear of clowns. We are coming upon John Wayne Gacy. He was in Illinois between 1972 and 1978, and he was the killer clown and was roaming the streets. He dressed up as a friendly-faced clown known as either Pogo or Patches the Clown, and he lured children to come home with him, preferably young boys. He went on to rape and murder 33 young boys and young men. His victims were usually induced to his address by force or deception. I know he would give some of the poorer kids odd jobs to lure them in and pay them some money. And all but one were murdered by asphyxiation or strangulation with a makeshift tourniquet. His first victim, however, was stabbed to death. Now, Gacy himself had an abusive childhood, and he struggled with his sexuality. Over the years, he exhibited tendencies toward sadism, which ended up resulting in several encounters with the law in the 1960s. Now, in 1968, his conviction for sexually assaulting a teenage boy, he was confined in the Iowa State Men's Reformatory and forced to go and have a psychological evaluation. Now, after his release in 1970, while he was still on parole, He was yet again arrested for sexual assault, but the charge was later dropped. After all this, Gacy bought a home in suburban Chicago and he became a fairly successful independent contractor. Now, in 1978, after one of Gacy's victims was reported missing, police learned that Gacy was the last person known to have seen this guy. After obtaining a search warrant, police discovered the bodies of 29 boys and young men in a crawl space beneath Gacy's house. Indeed, that area of the house just emitted of a foul stench for years, and people complained about it, neighbors, guests. But he told his house guests that the smell was from the result of moisture buildup.
Yeah.
Yes. In the end, 26 victims were found buried within this crawl space. 3 others were found buried elsewhere on the property, while the 4th victim, there was 4 more victims, they were discarded in the Des Plaines River. They were not even on his property at all. Gacy ended up spending 14 years on death row for his crimes, and he was eventually executed, which I think he deserved, by a lethal injection on May 10th, 1994. Unfortunately, his house went into despair, and it was eventually demolished in 1979. There was a new home built in its place in 1988. However, it was said that his former home was insanely haunted, and people that had a chance to go through it claimed to hear screamings of young boys and even witnessed an apparition of a large man dressed in a clown outfit wandering through the house. Oh,
That'd be creepy.
very creepy. And, of course, we must wonder if the owners of the new home built on top of this marred land have had any strange occurrences happen. Okay, Kristen. My favorite is next. This is my favorite.
Your absolute favorite?
Yes.
Well, that is Jeffrey Dahmer.
Absolutely.
He was not only considered a serial killer, but was also a cannibal and was dubbed the name the Milwaukee Cannibal. He also didn't just kill his victims, he tortured, raped, and then dismembered them as well.
As well as ate some of the parts.
Yes. Well, he ended up taking the lives of 17 men between the years of 1978 through 1991. And over the course of this 13-year span, Dahmer sought out mostly African American men at bars, malls, and bus stops. He would then lure them home with promises of money or sex and would give them alcohol laced with drugs when they arrived. Then he would strangle them to death.
Oh my.
Well, then he would engage in sexual acts with the corpses before dismembering them and disposing of them. However, he often kept their skulls or genitals as souvenirs.
Gruesome.
And he frequently took photos of his victims at various stages of the murder process so he could recollect each act afterward and relive the experience.
Ugh.
So as a child, Dahmer was described as an energetic and happy kid until the age of 4, when he had a surgery to correct a double hernia that seemed to have caused a change within him. He then became subdued and withdrawn, following the birth of his younger brother and the frequent moves his family made. And by his early teens, he was disengaged, tense, and unfriendly. His compulsions towards necrophilia and murder began around the age of 14, but it appears his parents' divorce a few years later made those thoughts actually turn into actions.
Yes.
So his first murder actually took place in 1978 at the age of 18, when he picked up a hitchhiker and took him to his parents' house where he tortured and killed him. His next victim wouldn't be taken until almost 10 years later, 1987.
And with that, folks, we will be right back with more about Jeffrey Dahmer after this short break. You are listening to Ghost Talk Radio on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.
"23 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to Ghost Talk Radio with me as your host, Shelly Robertson. And joining me tonight is Kristen Boyd. If you just tuned in, we invite you all to join us in chat at WBHM-DB.com, where you can ask us any questions you may have. Now, we have been discussing serial killers and the hauntings that surround them. If you missed the first part of our show, no worries, folks. You can catch the full show archive on Spreaker, Google Play, iTunes, and iHeartRadio at your leisure. Now, before the break, we were discussing Jeffrey Dahmer, and of course, he is my favorite. And I'm going to let you continue on with that, Kristen, because he's just fascinating and gruesome. So carry on with Jeffrey Dahmer.
All right. So Dahmer's killing spree ended when he was arrested on July 22nd, 1991.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that day, 2 police officers picked up a 32-year-old man who was wandering the streets with a handcuff dangling from his wrist. They decided to investigate his claims that a weird dude had drugged him. When he directed them to Dahmer's apartment, Dahmer calmly offered to get the keys for the handcuffs. The officers then noticed Polaroid photos of dismembered bodies lying around.
Oh, goodness.
Key indicator there.
Yes.
At this point, Dahmer was subdued by the officers. An additional search ended up revealing a head in the refrigerator, 3 more in the freezer, along with preserved skulls jars containing genitalia, and an extensive gallery of disturbing Polaroid photos.
And, I saw some of those crime scene photographs, and there were gutted bodies in the bathroom, and it was very gruesome.
Yes, very much so. Well, Dahmer was sentenced to 16 life terms.
Yes.
But in 1994, he was killed by a fellow inmate who had actually beat him to death. Now, Dahmer was originally from Bath, Ohio, and his childhood home is rumored to be insanely haunted due to it being the site of his first grisly murder, where he brought home a hitchhiker, strangled him, then dismembered him and scattered his bones over the property. Now, it is said that Dahmer himself, along with other spirits, have been witnessed there. It is also said to be one of the best locations ever to pick up EVPs.
Interesting.
Well, his childhood home has been recently purchased.
Yes, and I remember when it went up for sale. I wanted to buy it and live there so bad.
That would have been very cool.
Right.
But it can be rented out for $10,000 a month for any of you investigators that want to do some serious paranormal
That's very serious for 10 grand a month, I must tell you.
Yeah.
Which brings us to one that I know everybody's heard of, and that is Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. Now, everybody's heard of him, I'm sure.
I think so.
Now, Ramirez committed his first murder in April of 1984, and he was 24 at the time. He continued his killing spree over the span of a year before getting caught in August of 1985. His favorite place to choose his victims was around the LA area, and one other place was that he used to use actually as a refuge was the Cecil Hotel. And the Cecil Hotel in itself, folks, is a very interesting place and probably haunted like nobody's business, and it's been depicted in movies and everything else. Anyways, this was Ramirez's favorite place to go. Now, Ramirez was born on February 29th, 1960, and as an adolescent, he was heavily influenced by his older cousin Miguel, who had recently returned from fighting in the Vietnam War. Now, Miguel told Ramirez about the torture and the mutilation that he had inflicted on several Vietnamese women, proving to him that he actually did it by showing him pictures he had taken. So then at the age of 13, he witnessed his cousin, Miguel, murder his own wife. And it was around 1977, after being caught with possession of marijuana, that he moved to California, where he became addicted to cocaine and burglary, and also cultivated an interest in sadism. Now, this interest actually became a calling card for investigators at the crime scenes. Ramirez's first known murder was on June 28, 1984, and the victim was 79-year-old Jenny Vincow, who he sexually assaulted, stabbed, and he killed her during a burglary in her home. Ramirez was a Satanist as well, and seemed to have no MO except to be as sadistic as possible when he killed people. Now, his victims included men, women, and children who were chosen randomly and killed in a variety of different ways with whatever weapon was handy at the time, and often taking place after a sexual assault. He was ultimately caught after he left a rape victim alive, and she got a look at his getaway car, which was a stolen Toyota, and she turned this information into the police. Now, the car was found abandoned, and it was connected to Ramirez by one single fingerprint, folks.
Dang.
That was his mistake. One single fingerprint. Once the suspect was in custody, they broadcasted his name everywhere, and they called him, and he was immediately recognized, and he ended up being beaten by a mob in East Los Angeles after everybody heard all the gruesome stuff he did. He was later convicted, and it was in 1989, I believe, of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, and 14 counts of burglary, and he was sentenced to death. He spent the next 23 years on death row at San Quentin, but he died of lymphoma in 2013 at the age of 53. Now, during Ramirez's killing spree, he would use that Cecil Hotel as his sanctuary. After killing someone, he would return to the Cecil and ditch his blood-soaked clothes in the dumpster out back, then walk into the hotel either naked or in his underwear. None of which would have raised an eyebrow, since the Cecil Hotel in the 1980s was considered total chaos. His personal room was on the top floor, floor 14 of the hotel. Now, the 14th floor of the Cecil Hotel itself is said to hold a lot of paranormal activity and feelings of dread, some of which are attributed to the spirit of Ramirez himself. Reports of strange, dark images lurking within the shadows have been seen. Strange and spooky noises have been heard, along with items being moved to different locations. Now, some of these activities have been linked to Ramirez and the room that he occupied during his killing spree. And next we have an interesting little piece. Our first lady killer of the evening.
And she is very interesting, to say the least.
Yes.
Her name is Lavina Fisher, and she was born in 1793 and is actually considered the first female serial killer in the history of the United States.
Oh, yes.
Now, there are a few stories that surrounds Lavina and her husband, John. The following is one of the most popular and well-known of those stories. So, Lavina is said to have a way with men, especially her husband, John. John and Lavina ran the 6 Mile House, a place for travelers that were heading in and out of Charleston to stop for a drink or a room to rest for the night. Now, Lavina loved to bring men, preferably the rich ones, into her personal parlor for tea and conversation.
Oh, la la. Mm-hmm.
Well, that tea, she poisoned it to all those unlucky men who fell for her trickery.
Oh, boy.
Well, as the poison would take hold, Lavina and John would help the suddenly weary guest to a bed in the back of the building. Now, once the guest was passed out, John would spring a lever and a trap door was sprung, and the bed, occupant and all, would fall into a pit below the house.
Oh, my goodness.
It's pretty.
What a
pretty
contraption.
Crazy. No kidding. Well, if the poison in the fall didn't kill him, John would then finish him off and relieve the body of all its valuables and put the bed back and dispose of the body.
Oh, boy.
Well, unfortunately for them,
Uh-huh.
one of their attempted victims, John Peebles, managed to escape the Fishers only because he didn't like tea.
Uh-huh.
So when the Fishers weren't looking, he had dumped the tea into a nearby plant and faked being tired to get away from them and their odd behavior. Well, once shown to his room, he decided to sit in the chair to rest since he was not tired enough to go to sleep.
Uh-huh.
Well, as he was sitting there, the bed collapsed, and he jumped up. I mean, I would be startled.
Oh, yes.
He jumped up and he tried to run out the door to summon help, but to his surprise and theirs, the Fishers were standing in the doorway.
Oh, boy.
Well, John slammed the door shut and jumped out the window and ran all the way to Charleston police and reported what had happened.
Uh-huh.
Well, once the police began investigating, they realized there were several reports of missing travelers along that stretch of road and ended up locating the bodies of numerous victims along the side of it.
Wow.
Well, the Fishers were hauled off to the Charleston jail to await their fate. So in South Carolina at the time, married women automatically escaped the death penalty.
Interesting.
And that's what Lavina had hoped for, to escape the gallows herself. However, the judge ruined her plan by telling her that John would be hung first.
Oh, no.
Which would make her a widow and eligible to be hung.
That's how they got around that.
They did. Well, on February 18th, 1820, it is rumored that Lavina wore a wedding dress to her hanging in hopes her beauty and pitifulness of her state would cause some man within the crowd to swoon in and marry her at the last minute.
Oh, she's a murderer. Like they're going to jump at the chance to marry her.
Oh, nice try.
Oh, boy.
Well, when that didn't occur, it was said that her mood had drastically changed.
Oh, I bet.
And according to one of the historians of the time, she stamped in rage and swore with all the vehemence of her amazing vocabulary, calling down damnation. The crowd stood shocked in silence while she cut short one curse with another and ended with a volley of shrieks.
Right.
A temper tantrum.
Yes, exactly.
Well, right before her hanging, she gave her last statement, which would ultimately remain embedded within history for all time. Well, she said, "If you have a message you want to send to hell, give it to me, I'll carry it." Then, before the hangman could pull the lever to hang her, she jumped off the scaffold and hanged herself.
Oh, my. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction.
I guess not. Well, it was almost immediately following her death that the locals began to report seeing her face floating behind the bars of the window where she was held. Then after the great earthquake in 1886, people began to report seeing her wandering around in other parts of the neighborhood, as well within the cemetery a few blocks away. Now, some visitors of the Charleston Old City Jail have claimed to encounter her ghost, along with witnessing other shadowy humanoid forms. Sounds of chains dragging, doors slamming, voices in unoccupied rooms, and objects being moved or disappearing have also been reported, but not all necessarily relate to Lavina herself.
Right.
Well, some paranormal investigators have also captured EVPs, photos, and videos that they believe to be of Lavina's ghosts.
Well, actually, I have been to that old city jail in Charleston, South Carolina. And I will tell you, we went on a ghost tour one night while we were out there. This was a couple years back. And I caught some very interesting photographs. We were all completely in the dark, and I had my night vision camera, of course.
Right.
We were in a small room, much like the room we're in right now.
Okay.
And you know how the night vision lights up?
Yes.
Well, what appeared behind two other guests standing in front of me was shadows that did not match the people standing there.
Wow.
They were shadows of other people. They were not the same people.
Huh.
It was very, very strange looking.
Sure.
Which brings us now to Charles Kennedy, folks. As one legend goes, in 1865, Charles moved to Monroe Valley, New Mexico, bringing with him his wife and his 3-year-old son, choosing an isolated area on the Taos Trail, which he built a small cabin for him and his family to live. Now, at this time, the trail was mainly used by lone cowboys until gold was found within the area, to which then the trail became well-traveled by miners heading in and out, hoping to make their fortunes mining for gold. Now, it was also around this time that rumors began to emerge that some of those lone travelers last seen heading on this trail never returned back home. Then, I'll tell you what, during the winter of 1871, a prominent citizen headed down the trail and was never seen or heard from again. An investigation was actually started, and the citizen's belongings, which was his horse and mules, were found on the Kennedy property. Kennedy replied to this accusation by telling them he found the animals wandering alone, and he assumed the Apaches had killed or abducted the owner. However, this was found to be suspicious because the Apaches were known to love mule meat, and they would almost never leave that animal behind. But with no concrete proof, the investigators were forced to head back into town. Now, a few weeks later, a stranger stopped near the Kennedys' cabin and at a nearby spring for a drink near the cabin. He noticed his shack and there was an odor coming from it. Now, he saw a young boy and figured it was the owner's son, so he walked up to him and asked him if his daddy was a trapper, to which the boy told him he was not, and that smell was from an Indian that his dad had killed earlier and hadn't had time to chop up and burn yet, if you can believe that. Right? So the son is telling the traveler this. So, unfortunately, Kennedy was standing just around the corner, and he had heard the entire conversation. To quickly, he rounded the corner, and he shot the man in the head, and he grabbed his son by his feet and slammed him onto the rock chimney until he was dead.
Oh, my.
Kennedy then proceeded to drink himself into a stupor and passed out. At this point, his wife took advantage of the chance, and she ran 15 miles to the nearest town, where she burst into a saloon and told everyone what had happened. And that there were the bones of at least 20 other men on the property, and that he had also killed their 2 other children before moving to that area. Oh my gosh. The men promptly left, heading into the night to capture Charles Kennedy, okay? Now, they returned that same night with Kennedy and a big old bag of blackened bones, and Kennedy was taken to jail to await trial, but that night, the men of the town decided to have a lynching party with Kennedy as the guest of honor. They took his head off with the blade of a long knife, and eventually his head was secured to a pike pole and was stuck in the southwest corner of the Lambert Saloon, where it resided for over a year. Kennedy is said to have murdered upwards of 100 men before being caught. People say Kennedy's ghost still lives on and continues to kill victims even after death. They say on dark and windy nights, the screams of those being killed can still be heard, and the smell of burning flesh permeates the air. A headless ghost has also been seen wandering in the area in search for his head. And with that, folks, we will be right back with more Ghost Talk Radio. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
45 minutes past the hour. You are listening to Ghost Talk Radio with me as your host, Shelly Robertson. Joining me tonight is Kristen Boyd, and we are broadcasting live on station WBHM from Ohio's most haunted jail, the old Paulding County Jail, located in Paulding, Ohio. Now, we have been discussing serial killers and the hauntings surrounding them this evening. If you missed the first part of the show, you can always listen to our full show archive at your leisure on Spreaker, Google Play, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. We will post our archives on our Ghost Talk Radio Facebook page. You just go to Facebook, type in Ghost Talk Radio, and we'll pop right up. And you can look at all of our photo albums we have there from tonight's show and from previous shows. Now, we have been talking about some of the most sadistic serial killers who committed some of the most horrific murders, and it is no wonder why there are so many hauntings surrounding these crime scenes, including the spirits of the people who committed the killings. But there is even a more scarier serial killer than the ones we spoke about already. Those are the ones who don't seem weird, who aren't social outcasts, the ones who actually fit right in and are actually pillars in our communities. You may be friends with them. They may live right next door to you and you don't even know about their dark side, because in all other aspects, they seem perfectly normal. And we will leave you tonight with one more very famous serial killer who fits just this description. And it is Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK killer. Why don't you tell them about the BTK killer, Kristen?
All right. Known as the BTK killer, Dennis Rader murdered 10 people in Wichita, Kansas area from 1974 to 1991, often leaving clues to taunt the authorities.
Oh, yes.
Now, by all accounts, he seemed like a normal member of society. He spent 1966 to 1970 in the United States Air Force. And upon discharge, he moved to Park City, where he worked in the meat department of a Leaker's IGA supermarket, where his mother was a bookkeeper. Now, he married Paula Dietz on May 22nd, 1971, and had 2 children.
All normal.
All normal. He even attended Butler County Community College in El Dorado, earning an associate's degree in electronics in 1973. Well, he then enrolled at Wichita State University and graduated in 1979 with a bachelor's in administration of justice.
Isn't that ironic?
Very much so. Well, he also worked as an assembler for the Coleman Company, an outdoor supply company. He worked at the Wichita-based office of ADT Security Services from 1974 to 1988, where he installed security alarms as part of his job. And this just blows my mind. And in many cases, for the homeowners concerned about the BTK killings.
That just freaks me right out. So you have the killer installing your alarm system, and he can get around that any old time he wants because he installed it.
That's just insane.
Oh my.
Well, Rader was a census field operations supervisor for the Wichita area in 1989, before the 1990 federal census. Now, in May 1991, he became a dog catcher and compliance officer in Park City. Now, in this position, neighbors recalled him as being sometimes overzealous and extremely strict. And one neighbor complained he euthanized her dog for no reason.
Oh, boy.
Now, on March 2nd, 2005, the Park City Council terminated Rader's employment for failure to report to work or call in. He had been arrested for the murders 5 days earlier.
How about that? So he missed work.
Well, Rader was also a member of Christ Lutheran Church and had been elected president of the church council.
So think about this. He was a member of the church council while he was committing these murders.
I don't even know how they could do that.
I don't know. Keep going, because I know there's more creepy stuff.
Oh, there is. Well, he was also a Cub Scout leader.
How would you like him leading your little Cub Scout troops?
It just keeps getting better and better. So, on July 26, 2005, after Rader's arrest, his wife was granted an emergency divorce, which waived the normal waiting period.
Oh, absolutely. Of course it would.
Couldn't blame him for that.
Yes.
So he would stalk his murder victims sometimes for weeks, break into their homes, then bind them, torture them, and kill them. He found the killings to be sexually gratifying, and he often took items or souvenirs, if you will, from the victims after killing them.
Oh, my.
He would then send or leave notes about this to taunt law enforcement. Now, after killing 10 people, he went silent for many, many years, until 30 years after his first murder, which actually included an entire family, a wife, a husband, and their 2 children.
Yeah, so children were not off limits to Dennis Rader.
No. Oh. Well, he started sending taunting letters and even some of the murder victims' items to police.
Oh, boy, getting brazen.
Very much. Well, after, 30 years or so?
Right, he thought he was scot-free,
Yep.
home scot-free.
However, he made his last mistake by sending his last note to police on a floppy disk, where police were able to track it and found the disk came from his computer at the church where he was president of the church council.
Oh, my gosh. Can you imagine
Oh, my gosh.
all the members of the church? Oh, my
Oh,
goodness.
I'm sure they flipped.
Oh, yes.
So, of course, after he was caught, he gave confessions to the murders he committed, speaking as if he were just carrying on a normal, everyday conversation.
And I watched this trial, and it was just bizarre. He did. He told about it. He told details what he did. Talking just like you're having a normal conversation over coffee. It was the strangest thing.
No emotion.
None whatsoever.
Well, he was sentenced to life without parole. It is said that many of the locations where he murdered people are haunted by the spirits of the victims, including EVPs, strange noises, and even ghostly shadows.
Could you imagine? And I mean, I saw interviews after he was caught, because it was quite a shock. And I watched the trial on TV, and they were stunned. They had no idea, because he was so normal, and he fit into everything in the community.
He was a part of everything.
Yes, so he was not even suspected. Think about the people who thought about, oh my gosh, he installed my alarm system, and he was a serial killer.
Yeah.
You have no idea. I mean,
scary.
That's very horrific indeed.
Yes,
I mean, everyone truly was so shocked, all the people that was interviewed. So I ask all of you out there, my listening friends, do you all really know your neighbors? Do you? Right?
Yeah.
Now, I want to take a moment to let you all know what we have coming up here at the jail for the month of September. And we have some exciting things coming up.
Very exciting. I cannot wait.
Oh, yes. September is going to be a fun and busy month for us. Now, I want to let everybody know that we do have a Ghost Hunt Weekends public ghost hunting event scheduled for next Friday and Saturday, September 7th and 8th. This event is organized and put on by Ghost Hunt Weekends, one of the largest paranormal event companies in the United States, with an office in the UK. Ghost Hunt Weekends is owned and operated by Chad and Stacy Morin, who are just wonderful people. And I want to add, just so everyone out there is aware, that there are only 3 full weekends left for this year to attend one of those fantastic ghost hunts. Then after that, the jail will then close down for the winter season as far as ghost hunts are concerned. Opening again in May of next spring. Now, you can reserve your spot for one of the remaining hunts by going to ghosthuntweekends.com and clicking on the Old Paulding Jail. There are just a few remaining tickets left, so get your spot reserved today. We have a few private group paranormal investigation dates left for this year. So if you have a few friends or a paranormal team and you want to come investigate the jail privately, go to 187pi.com, as the private sessions are booked directly with us. And also at our website, you can find all the available details and the remaining dates that are left for this year. And I do think we have a couple weekdays that are going to be added to that calendar, but for the most part, weekends are done gone for the year, I do believe. We also have the escape games running the month of September, and the September theme is the Barker crime family. And this one is such a really fun one. And we have noticed the ghosts here, the spirits here in the building, they find comedy in this theme too. They have disembodied, laughed, and said, look at them and stuff. We've got all this evidence on video. It's funny. So I think they laugh at us during this one because we're dressed up as inmates and we've got people chained and locked up in the cell blocks, and they're finding it comical. So, and we find that comical too.
Yeah, we do.
Here's something really exciting. I can't wait. September 13th through the 16th, 187PI will be at Scarefest, which is the largest paranormal and horror convention in the United States, and it's held in Lexington, Kentucky. We have a booth there. So, to all of our listening friends out there, if you are going to be there, stop by our booth and say hello to us in person. That'd be fantastic. Now, I also want to say, Kristen, tonight, who would you say was the favorite serial killer for you to have covered?
Oh gosh, there's so many great ones. I think Dahmer is going to be at the top of my list on this.
Well, I'll tell you, the place stunk so bad, and they had reported the smell also.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I saw a lot of the photos and stuff, and they were just hauling out even barrels of body parts. There was pots of things cooking on the stove, and
my goodness,
it was quite an ordeal.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
He did not put up a fight when they caught him either. He
seemed very relaxed.
Yeah, he went with them peacefully. And one thing about him, he would go to the clubs to pick up gay men, and they followed him with no problems. Now, wouldn't you think once you went to an apartment that didn't smell quite right, it smelled, because I'm sure rotting flesh just smells like nobody's business. Would you stay?
No.
Would you not just open the door and that hit you in the nose and
I'd be like,
bye now.
Exactly.
I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to our live broadcast tonight, and I wish everyone a wonderful evening. Tune in next time for more Ghost Talk with 187PI. Fridays at 7 p.m. Central and 8 p.m. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.